Welcome to another episode of the brand called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an accomplished leader with a deep understanding of AI from Bangalore, India, Jyothika Raju. Jyothika, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here.
Thank you. Jyothika is the co founder and program director of Impact AI Foundry. So, Jyotika, let's begin with your early years. What first sparked your interest in technology, public policy, and social impact?
So I think there wasn't like one moment as such. I think when I was growing up, obviously when you're in Bangalore, I think engineering is the thing that you're thinking about all the time. And I really didn't have a specific goal or I didn't know what I wanted to do in life yet. And I was just very open to exploring and seeing where I could fit.
Mhm,
And I think computer science was something that interested me, but I didn't know if that was what I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
mhm,
And obviously, I'm like talking to family and being like, how do I figure this out? And my dad was like, engineering is the most like versatile thing. You can do anything you want after that. So that's how I went into computer science. I did my undergrad in Bangalore. But while I was studying and doing like working on projects and things like that, I realized that a lot of my projects tend to do with social impact. And I also started volunteering in Bangalore with a couple of NGOs, which is where I think my interest in social impact comes to. But what really clicked for me over time is that I want to find out how to meld both of my interests, like tech and impact. And that's where I think policy came in, where I didn't want to just work in the nonprofit space or just work as a software engineer. I wanted to see where more structural change could come in and like try to really effectuate how, like change conditions for everyone who are working in the
mhm.
system, right? And yeah, I think that's where like policy seemed like a glamorous choice.
Yeah.
I'm still in doing my master's right now, so I'm not sure what the reality would look like.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think I'm still finding out a space to bring all of these three things together.
Fascinating. It's amazing how you found literally a cross section of all these three between technology, policy, and impact.
Yeah.
Very exciting. And then you have managed to bring in the overall excitement of AI into this triangle as well. Tell me a little bit more about your interest in AI and how do you personally define responsible and accountable AI?
Yeah, I think I mean when I was in college, which was like 2, 3 years ago, I think that's when AI became a really big part of the conversations. That when
Mhm.
ChatGPT came out, then Claude came out, and if you were an engineer, I think interacting with AI became inevitable.
Yeah.
And that's where you sort of interact with it, figure out how these tools are working, and how you can possibly sort of further your interest in that.
Mhm.
But I think I also sort of started noticing what the problems could be with AI itself. Like, I think when we first saw all of these models come out, the thing that people were grappling with most was bias. I think these systems were biased, even in things like facial recognition and hiring algorithms. And I think even now, recently, we see a lot of bias in these LLMs. And that's where I really started looking into responsible AI and like really understanding what that means. And I think for me, responsible AI really is about who is sort of building these tools out and who your end users are and how you're sort of using that data to not further like the discrimination that we see already. And I think because of the data that these systems are sort of trained on, bias, inheriting bias is inevitable.
Mhm.
But I see that to really further responsible AI, I think governments need to come into the conversation. I think a lot of countries, I think even South Korea and Japan have a lot of AI legislation that's being passed
Mhm.
right now. And even really understanding that there are very few companies that are sort of controlling what the conversation around AI is looking like.
Mhm.
And really, like looking at how you can shape this ecosystem, not just as like a voluntary ethics commitment on their websites, but more structurally, like the EU AI Act is like an example of how you can really mandate like fairness audits and things like that.
Mm,
But when we were building like Impact AI Foundry, which is the program that we're running, I think when we look at, we're really thinking about being very responsible with AI, especially because of the communities that these NGOs are going to be working with.
mm,
And I think there are three things that I personally sort of look at for responsible AI. The first is like honest representation,
mhm.
like really understanding who these communities are and who your stakeholders are in the design process itself and not just as an afterthought of these
Right.
tools itself. And the second is what's the honest capability? Like what can this AI tool actually do for you? Like AI shouldn't just be used because it's a buzzword right now. You shouldn't
Correct.
adopt it and just like put it into wherever it can fit. But really understanding what can this tool do for you.
Mm,
And I think accountability is also a big part of the conversation where you need to have a human in the loop, especially for the context of where these organizations work in,
mm,
where you're able to intervene. And I think that's what sort of separates responsible AI from the whole like overarching conversation about AI. And yeah,
mm.
that's what.
Great response. Great response. Thank you. Jyotika, tell me, what did your work in AI governance research teach you about the opportunities and risks of AI?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of opportunities, especially for in the space that we're working with NGOs. When you have a lot of resource constraints, you have tight budgets, you can't really like hire a lot of technical talent. I
Mm,
think that's definitely an opportunity for people to upskill. I think AI is making a lot of things more accessible for people who are not engineers. Like you can create your own website now, you can create a small app by yourself, you can do a lot of these things. But I think the risks are also real. Like I was talking
mm,
about things like bias, things like accessibility. And also, I think in the global south, because a
mm.
lot of these systems are designed with a very Eurocentric viewpoint, I think it becomes difficult to adopt them for people who speak the language that these models were not trained on. And I think we need to be very careful about who AI is going to be affecting the most and
Correct.
who's like the people that are vulnerable. Like I
Correct.
see it as like I think a lot of governance frameworks are trying to look at it as a very neutral infrastructure.
Mm,
But even if you consider AI being like a commodity like electricity, I
mm.
think even electricity access is very unequal, right?
Correct.
And I think it's important to be very deliberate when we understand what are the opportunities and what the risks that
Mm.
come with it
Very
itself.
well said. But since you spoke of electricity, I mean, energy uh,
Yeah.
is directly and yet indirectly related to AI because of the immense need for all these big machines for electricity. But then, what lessons from the sustainability sector have influenced your work in technology policy?
Yeah, I think my first sort of tryst with the sustainability space came with a think tank that I was working with. And there I really was working on like a renewable energy siting framework, like to find areas where we can really build these big solar farms and
Mm,
renewable energy plants in general, right? And I
mm,
think the question there was how do you sort of deploy something that is genuinely like
mm,
useful for like the public itself, but really
mm,
without destroying or affecting the communities around you that you're actually trying to protect, right?
mm,
And when you're mapping this, you look at things like environment sensitivity, you look at social vulnerability, and you look
mm.
like how these livelihoods of people around you are sort of getting destroyed, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's the word for word challenge in AI itself. Like
Mm,
it's been very slow to adopt like precautionary thinking. They're more reactive than proactive.
correct.
So I think even if you look at AI data centers, right, I
Mm,
think the energy demands of that is quite high,
yeah.
and they are the largest consumers right now of electricity, water. And I think another concerning fact is that a lot of these data centers are moving into the global south, which means that there's already lower protections for people here, and it becomes even more important to sort of get more regulation in place to make sure that these vulnerable communities aren't getting affected. And also because this is when you think about renewable energy and if you compare it with like what's happening with AI, RE itself, like when you take a new swath of land, it's
Mm,
not just a technology swap. It's
correct.
just you're reshaping how the land is getting used, you're replacing supply chains, and you're also like reinventing what the labor market is going to look like for that
Mm,
community itself, right? And I think that's what AI is going to be like right now, and like the risks are really real, and I think we all
mm.
need to be grappling with that
Well
right
said.
now.
Well said. Jyotika, you're the founder of Impact AI Foundry. Tell
Yeah.
me about Impact AI Foundry and what gap did you notice in the nonprofit ecosystem that inspired you to create this?
So I think Impact AI Foundry, just to tell you the bare bones of what we're doing, is we run this program for 2 months where we have four in-person sessions where we bring a couple of NGOs into a room together
Mm,
and we help them to understand, think about their workflows, think about where AI can help you, what can you automate, what's better left not touching, and just basically helping them think through that and building capacity. And the way that we do this is that we pair them with like an engineer from Bangalore, someone who has like a deep knowledge of how to use AI, how to use technology, and what kind of problems can be solved using these tools.
mm,
And the reason that we do that is we don't ask these technologists to build for the NGO. We want the NGOs to adopt these tools and to understand how to build them themselves.
mm,
So it's more about trying to help them walk away with a working tool, but also making sure that they are going to be able to build for themselves rather than relying on like an engineer or someone that they have to hire or spend more money and funding on
mm,
creating these new tools itself, right? So that's the aim that we really have when we started out this program.
mm,
And when we look at what gaps are in the nonprofit space right now, I think the most stark one is obviously things like funding, like budgets and
mm,
time and
mm,
capacity building. All of these are barriers, right? It's not that NGOs don't want to try it, but there's always a sense that, you know, you have to spend more time on it, you have to spend money on it, and it becomes difficult to sort of really go ahead and see how this can help you. It's difficult for them to be creative when they're already constrained.
mm,
And through, like, when I was volunteering to this, that's what I noticed, that there were a lot of issues that you can solve, but you don't have the people to solve them, or you don't have the know-how. I think
mm,
even the talent that gets attracted, maybe not the best people to help you build these tools.
mm,
So I think for us, what we want them to walk away with is not just something generic and not like an AI training where you're just learning what this is and things like that, but more that like you're able to build a tool that can become something that you yourself built, you maintain it, and you adapt it. So it's more of a learning and a teaching process than actually like it would have been easier for us to go in and build this tool for them. But I think that's not helping them or it's not sustainable in the long run.
correct. Correct.
So yeah, that's what we're trying to do.
Well said. But given the um, availability of AI in virtually every company, every human being is talking about AI. What are some of the challenges nonprofits face when it comes to adoption of AI, other than just going to a chat GPT and saying, help me write an email or get me a new itinerary?
Yeah, I think the challenges are a couple, right?
Mm,
Firstly, again, funding, even to get your staff to get trained on how everyone can go write a generic prompt,
yeah.
I think, but to really understand what these tools can do for you and how much of value you can extract for them, you still need to have a base level of training on how to exactly do this.
Mm,
And I think that's where funding becomes a problem because all our resources are dedicated to working on the ground, especially
mm,
if you're a very grassroots organization. I think you're always going to grapple with where do we put this money to, right? And I think the second problem would be attracting like the right talent too, right? I think it's not because the smart people don't want to come into the nonprofit sector. It's just that there's no real pipeline. Like there is no way for an engineer in Bangalore to be able to interact with an NGO and actually go build something for them. But and even if they build it for them, it needs to be like a continuous process. You can't build something and leave them to sort of handle it because then that just breaks down. And I think really building people who know the problem need to be building, and that's what the gap is, right? Like you can be like a for-profit organization saying we'll go in and build this for you, but you don't know what the actual problems are. And building trust, like being responsible about how you build these systems, but also really like nonprofits have a lot of data from all of these vulnerable stakeholders that they work with. So how do you protect that data? How do you get them to trust you, to trust these tools itself? I think there are still a lot of people
Correct.
who struggle with that.
Well said.
So.
Can you give me an example of, one or two of the kind of AI tools that you have helped build?
So this program is actually, we've derived it from a program in New York, and I actually volunteered as a technologist there too. And I think there were really interesting things that the nonprofits built out there. I think one
Mm,
was like an adaptive teaching platform for students where it would ask you a question. If the student put in the right answer, it then gives you like good and takes to the next question. If you don't understand it, you go back, you understand what level that student is at, and then give them an explanation that's appropriate to where they are and really helping them understand what's happening, right? And I think automating administrative tasks has been a big thing, like, creating, like getting grants into a database, sending out, grant writing and reporting. And I think a really important and useful tool that nonprofits are able to create is like data dashboards. Like a lot of them have all of this data, they have field data, but just to be able to visualize it in a more easy manner, even for a non-technical team member to be able to really get an interactive dashboard out there, I
mm,
think it's become a lot more easier to do that.
mm,
And things like chatbots, like multilingual chatbots, and these kind of different use cases that are very context specific. Like we want them to build for what's the context of their organization and what they really need,
mm,
rather than us saying, build this out as an example. We ask them to come with their problems and then figure out what they need.
Well said. How do you ensure that the AI solutions that are being built for nonprofits or that they are building themselves, they remain ethical, transparent, and genuinely useful?
Yeah, I think that's built into our the way we teach itself. It's because firstly, I think the first safeguard to really understand if this is a useful tool for you is to
Mm,
start with the workflow, not with the technology or with the tool. We're not going to be like go and start using like Claude Code or something like that. We
mm,
spend a significant amount of time really helping them map their existing processes and see what is it that you can automate with AI, where is it genuinely going to add value. Like we just want them to keep asking questions of does this add value to
mm,
us?
mm,
Where can it add value? And is it going to help us reduce time? Is it going to help us save money? You really need to be asking these questions to know whether if this is a useful tool for you
yeah,
or not.
yeah.
And even if it's a slower start, I think in the long run, it really helps you and prevents a lot of harm. I think the second question we ask is for them to think of who they're working with, what kind of data they're using,
Mm,
what are you building, and who is this going to affect? Like if something happens and it fails, who is this going to affect and who is the person that's going to be harmed? And I think when these conversations keep happening, then they're able to think of all of this when you're designing it itself and not after something happens. And I think the third is like independence, right? The thing that we want to give them is independence for them to be able to own it and for them to be responsible and
right.
accountable to maintain it. So yeah, I think that's sort of built into the structure of how we're going to be doing the
Very,
sessions.
very interesting.
So yeah.
What have been your biggest lessons as you have built Impact AI Foundry?
I think the first thing that I learned was that as someone with a technical background, you always want to move fast. The minute you see a
Correct.
problem, you're like, okay, we can like create like an app to solve this. We can create like
Mm,
this technology to solve this. We can use this to solve it. But really, it's like stepping back and asking that does this actually work? Is this actually going to help you? I think really getting slow and sitting with the process it was like uncomfortable at first, but it becomes more easier when you realize that for something to really help, you need to go slow and you can't just like solve every problem with a tech perspective.
mm,
And I think the second thing was like the difference between us being helpful versus us, like the nonprofits getting dependent on us. I think it's very easy to become like a tech consultant and
yeah,
be like, okay, we'll build this out for you.
correct.
But teaching is a much slower, it's a messier process than actually building it ourselves. And
Mm,
I think really the thing that we're focusing on is how to like have that patience to really get that foundation in for these nonprofits. And I think maybe the third thing, which is a little smaller, but one more thing I'm learning is because it's just still a very small team running this. It's about switching between the operational part of it to the visionary part of it. Like
Correct.
both of these are your jobs. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think really like balancing writing a catering plan on one day to really like envisioning what the future of the organization is going to be, both are happening at the same time. So
Mm.
yeah,
Great response. Thank you. Time for two more questions for you.
yeah.
As you look ahead, what role do you think governments, universities, startups, and nonprofits must play together to shape the future of AI?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question because I think all of these stakeholders come with their own like they have something real to contribute, but there's
Correct.
also like a genuine blind spot
Mm.
that can come in the way, right? I think governments have a lot of reach and legitimacy, but they move a little more slowly because they have to be careful about everything that they're doing.
Yeah.
And universities, I think, are even though they produce a lot of knowledge, they're dispensing knowledge, they're very disconnected from the real implementation part of it.
Mm.
And I think startups optimize obviously again for like growth and for profits, and they're not always aligned with like social impact and those kind of goals. And even though nonprofits are the ones closest to the communities that they're trying to help, the communities that are affected, I think they have resource constraints which stop them from doing a lot of things that these other organizations can do.
Mm.
So I think there's a genuinely a need for collaboration and like really understanding how you can structurally tackle this because it's still a new frontier, right? AI is still new. You
Correct.
can really you can harness use it for like doing a lot of good, and I think it's a good first step for governments to really understand how they can step in, for universities to create partnerships, and really startups and NGOs to work together to sort of, and that's what we're trying to do here, to like bring the for-profit sector and the non-profit sector together to be able to
Mm.
do something that's going to help a lot of.
Very
Yeah, I
interesting.
think it's the moment that
Yeah.
matters for
Yeah.
us
I
now.
agree. I agree. And my last question to you, Jyotika. For young professionals like you who want to work at the intersection of AI, policy, and social impact, what advice would you offer them?
I think I'm also still in my early in my journey. So
Correct.
rather than giving advice, I would like actually be, I would want to share what's working for me right now.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
first thing I would say is that if you're someone that's like interested in social impact, really stay close to the people that are affected by the problems that you care about, right?
Mm.
Not just like ju just so that you understand what the real issues are, and not from your perspective, but from the people who are actually going through these
Mm.
problems. I think they have the best lens of what they need, and it's better for you to be an observer and then work on it rather than thinking that you have all the best ideas.
Mm.
Because I think even for us, the best ideas haven't come from feeling like we know everything, but really
Correct.
sitting with like NGOs, sitting with people, and really understanding what are the problems that you're dealing with and how can we change this for you. And maybe another thing I try to say, and even I'm trying to figure out for myself, is don't try to, like, there's a lot of pressure to specialize really early
Mm.
and really find that spot where you'll like create your own journey. I think this intersection is new, like AI plus policy plus social impact is still a new territory. And I think the people who are doing a lot of work here don't fit into any existing categories itself. Like it is a bit of an ambiguous space. You don't know where it's going to go tomorrow. So I think it's a good place to be in because it's going to help you really think about what is it that you want and what's going to make you the most happy. Is it going to be working with the grassroots organizations and building out tech for them, or is it going to be like working with the UN and creating like governance frameworks for them? So yeah, I think keep asking yourself what you want, and it's okay if you don't have the answers. It's you will
Absolutely.
figure it out.
Absolutely. Or you can ask AI to give you the answer.
Definitely, yeah.
But on that note, Jyotika, I just want to say what a fascinating conversation this has been. I mean, quite an all-encompassing discussion on AI, yet highly focused on the cusp of technology impact in social sector. Thank you for the amazing work that you're doing, supporting so many social sector organizations through Impact AI Foundry. All the very best to you and good luck.
Thank you so much. It's a great conversation. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast. platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.